Along the Ohio River, in a neighborhood called Warwood, there used to be a steel foundry. It's gone now. The jobs left, the furnaces went cold, the buildings came down. For years, the land just sat there. Then something changed. A company announced plans for a massive data center and energy campus. Before the first server is powered on, before the first foundation is poured, people who live nearby are already in court. They're worried about the noise, the air quality, flooding, water, property values, and something else. They're challenging whether the state law that helped make projects like this possible is even constitutional. This isn't Northern Virginia. It's not Silicon Valley. It's not even Texas. This is West Virginia, and it's happening in 6 counties at the same time. Every week, we've been putting together another piece of this puzzle. Not all at once, one question at a time. The first episode, we asked, what is artificial intelligence? We talked about narrow AI, AGI, artificial general intelligence, ASI, artificial superintelligence. Because before you can understand what is being built, you have to understand what it is. Then we ask another question. Who's building it? Microsoft, Google, Amazon, OpenAI, Anthropic, NVIDIA. These companies are racing to build the future. On the previous episode, we followed the money. Who's investing? Who's partnering? Who's winning these government contracts? Because if you want to understand where an industry is going, it helps to know who is paying for it. When we followed the money, we learned that there are more than $200 million in federal AI contracts. But it wasn't just the money that changed. The language changed too. AI was increasingly framed as a national security priority, including mass surveillance capabilities and autonomous military systems. When the language changes, funding, policy, and eventually communities change too. So in this episode, we're asking a different question. One that brings everything we've learned into the real world for us. Where does all of this actually happen? It's not on your phone, it's not in the cloud, it's not inside ChatGPT. It happens in buildings, power plants, transmission lines, water systems, state laws, county meetings, courtrooms, and neighborhoods, where ordinary people suddenly find themselves living next to the infrastructure powering the artificial intelligence. Today, that place is West Virginia. You see, West Virginia didn't end up here by accident. It was chosen. Let's start with energy. Artificial intelligence needs enormous amounts of electricity. Not eventually, not tomorrow, today. West Virginia has something that many states do not. We have large natural gas resources, existing energy infrastructure, and room to build more. Now, add in geography. The state sits close enough to Washington, D.C. to matter strategically. Close to major internet routes, close to government, close to East Coast population centers, but without the land shortages, without the traffic, and without the rising costs of Northern Virginia. Then look at what state leaders have been saying. They've made it clear. West Virginia wants to attract large-scale AI infrastructure, data centers, energy projects, technology investment. The goal is simple: compete for an industry expected to grow for decades. Then there's something else: national security. For years, Northern Virginia became the center of America's digital infrastructure. Some policymakers now argue that's too much computing concentrated in one place. If one region experiences major disruption, so does a large part of the country's digital economy. Spreading that infrastructure across multiple states is increasingly being discussed as a strategic advantage. Let's put those pieces together. Cheap energy, available land, government support, strategic location, and suddenly, West Virginia isn't the backup plan, it's the next frontier. The question isn't why are companies interested? The question is what happens after they arrive? Across West Virginia, projects are appearing in counties that look very different from one another. Different companies, different proposals, one larger trend. So let's take a look. First, we have Tucker and Grant counties. This is one of the biggest proposals in the state, and it's called Ridgeline. The company says the project could eventually cover nearly 10,000 acres. If that number doesn't mean much, imagine about 15 square miles. That's an area larger than many entire towns. The company also talks about building multiple gigawatts of computing capacity. So, what's a gigawatt? Think of electricity like water flowing through a pipe. A gigawatt measures how much electricity can flow at one time. 1 gigawatt is enough to power hundreds of thousands of homes under typical conditions. Now, imagine several gigawatts. That's why these projects are creating so much discussion about power. Artificial intelligence doesn't just need computers, it needs enormous amounts of electricity to keep those computers running. Before a project this size can be built, it has to receive permits from state regulators. One of those permits is an air permit. It's basically the state's way of saying, here's what you're allowed to emit into the air and under what conditions. Ridgeline has received that permit, but it doesn't mean the debate is over. Environmental organizations and local residents have appealed it. An appeal simply means they're asking another authority to review whether the permit should have been issued in the first place. So today, the project's future is still uncertain. Next, let's talk about Mason County, West Virginia. The Monarch Project. It's a development that's linked to Microsoft. The company says it could use about 1.35 gigawatts of electricity. And if that number doesn't mean much, let's think of it this way. That's enough power to supply hundreds of thousands of homes under typical conditions. That's an enormous amount of electricity for one facility. So, where will that power come from? Not the public grid. The plan is to build its own natural gas microgrid. Think of a microgrid like a private power company. Instead of plugging into the same electric system your home uses, the data center would generate much of its own electricity on site, not as a backup, as its primary source of power. And that changes this conversation. Because if companies start building their own power plants, they're not just building data centers anymore. They're building entire energy campuses. And we'll get back to why that matters. Next, let's talk Putnam County, West Virginia. Putnam County has Google. The company has proposed a data center campus covering roughly 1,700 acres near Buffalo. If that sounds hard to picture, that's more than 2.5 square miles of land. Google says that the facility will operate using renewable or zero-emission energy. So what does that mean? Well, it means the company says it intends to match the electricity need for the project with power from sources like solar, wind, nuclear, or other energy that doesn't produce carbon emissions while generating electricity. That doesn't necessarily mean the data center is plugged directly into a solar farm or wind turbine. It means Google says its operations will be supported by renewable or zero-emission energy through its energy strategy. Why does this matter? Because one of the biggest questions surrounding artificial intelligence isn't just how much electricity these facilities need, it's where the electricity is coming from. And every company is answering that question a little bit differently. let's talk Berkeley County, West Virginia. Berkeley County has a proposed project called Penzance, an investment of roughly $4 billion. That's not a warehouse. That's the kind of money normally associated with airports, professional sports stadiums, or major manufacturing plants. The company plans to build a campus capable of supporting hundreds of megawatts of computing power. Now, in plain English that the rest of us can understand, this isn't a small server room, it's industrial scale computing built to run around the clock every day. And that's becoming the reality of artificial intelligence. The bigger AI becomes, the bigger the infrastructure behind it has to become. Let's talk Ohio County, West Virginia. Let's get back to where we started. Warwood. For generations, it was a working class neighborhood built around industry, steel, manufacturing, the kind of jobs that built families and built this community. Today, that former industrial site is being considered for something very different, a data center and energy campus. Some residents see opportunity, others have questions. Not about artificial intelligence itself, but about living next to the infrastructure that's supporting it. They're worried about noise, air emission, flooding, traffic, property values, and whether this project belongs this close to homes. Those concerns were important enough that residents filed a lawsuit because before construction begins, they want the courts to decide whether the project and the state law helping make it possible follow the rules. Whether they win or lose, one thing is already clear. This isn't just a debate about technology anymore. It's a debate about what kind of neighbor this new industry will be. Our final stop. Mingo and Logan Counties, West Virginia. The Adams Fork Project. An energy and ammonia complex designed to support future industrial development. Think of it as another piece of infrastructure needed to support large-scale industry. But this project isn't moving forward without opposition. It's already the subject of a federal lawsuit. The people bringing the case argue the project could affect protected wildlife, water resources, and surrounding environment without meeting all of the requirements of the federal environmental law. Just like we've seen across West Virginia, the question isn't only what gets built, it's whether the process meant to protect communities and natural resources was followed before the construction begins. Notice something. Every project is different. Different companies, different technologies, different counties. But almost every one has something else in common. Questions, public meetings, permit reviews, appeals, lawsuits. That's not the story of one project. That's the pattern we're seeing across the entire state. 6 counties, 6 different projects, different companies, different timelines. But something should stand out. Some are still proposals, some already have permits. Several are already facing lawsuits. And every one of them began with a familiar promise: jobs, investment, economic growth. Those promises matter, especially in communities that have spent decades looking for new opportunities. But so do the questions being asked by many of the people who already live here. Questions about our water, our electricity, the noise, the land use, local control. Questions we've now heard in Virginia, Georgia, Indiana, Texas, and now West Virginia. Because when the same questions begin showing up in different places, around different projects, it's worth paying attention to. Watch the behavior, because behavior leaves clues. Every project we have looked at started with the same promise. They promise jobs, investment, and progress. For many communities, these promises do matter. In West Virginia, we have spent decades searching for industries that can replace jobs that disappeared with coal, steel, and manufacturing. So when someone promises us billions of dollars in investment, we listen, and we should. But every promise raises another question. Not whether growth is good, but what is coming with it. So, what the communities are asking: what happens to our water? It's already in horrific conditions across the state. What happens to our roads? I mean, there are roads that we drive on that people shouldn't be driving on. I don't know about you guys, but I'm tired of having to pay for constant repairs to my vehicle because the conditions of the roads are so bad. I mean, when we have 55-mile-an-hour speed limits on a road that you can barely drive 10 miles an hour on, come on. What's going to happen to our power? I think most of us have seen effects of our power bill, and our power bills and our water bills are constantly increasing. Who gets to decide? Those aren't anti-technology questions, they're community questions. They're questions people ask, whether it's a factory, a pipeline, or now a data center. In West Virginia, those questions lead us to something else. Not a company and not a power plant. A law. Every major project has a beginning. Sometimes it isn't a groundbreaking ceremony, sometimes it's just legislation. In most states, if someone wants to build a massive industrial project, there are local steps, planning commissions, county meetings, public hearings, places where neighborhoods can stand up and be heard. It's not always easy, but local government usually has a role. West Virginia decided to do things differently. The state created the High Impact Data Center Program through House Bill 2014. The House Bill 2014 creates a faster state-level approval process, limits or overrides certain local zoning authority, encourages private microgrids, Supporters argued the industry was moving too quickly. If West Virginia wanted to compete, traditional permitting could take too long. They believed the state needed a faster path. Critics saw something different. They argued the law shifts important decisions away from local governments and toward the state, reducing the influence that communities have over projects that are being built near them. Whether the balance is appropriate is now being debated, not only in county meetings, but in courtrooms. Here's why this matters. Companies invest billions of dollars. They don't like uncertainty. Predictable rules reduce risk. And when governments change those rules, companies notice. That's true whether you're building a factory, a power plant, or one of the largest data centers in the country. That's not speculation. It's how investment works. Infrastructure follows policy, and policy tells you where the future is being built. But the law didn't just change permitting. It changed something else. It changed how these facilities plan to power themselves. Remember what we learned in one of our earlier episodes. Artificial intelligence doesn't just need computers. It needs electricity, and a lot of it. Across the country, the electric grid is struggling to keep up with demand. Building new transmission lines takes years, sometimes more than a decade. Technology companies do not want to wait that long, so they're finding another way. They're building their own power. West Virginia didn't just recognize that trend, it wrote it into policy. One of the state's largest proposed projects, the Microsoft-linked Monarch campus in Mason County, is designed around its own natural gas microgrid, not as emergency backup, as its primary source of electricity. The idea sounds simple. If the data center makes its own power, it won't compete with everyone else for electricity. And if it doesn't rely on the public grid, supporters argue it shouldn't raise your electric bill, where another debate begins. Consumer advocates, energy researchers, and some utility experts question whether projects of this scale remain completely separate from the broader electric system over time. What happens if new transmission lines are needed? What happens during maintenance, during emergencies, during future expansion? Those are questions still being discussed, and in some cases, still being litigated. The point isn't that anyone has all the answers. The point is, the promise depends on something very important, that the project stays largely independent. from the shared electric system. Whether that happens is something that only time can answer. The promise is that they will power themselves. The question is, will it stay that way? Because that's the pattern we've been seeing. Every new technology creates new promises. Every promise creates new questions. And those questions don't get answered in press releases. They get answered over years, through permits, through operations, through communities, and sometimes through the courts. Those court fights aren't theoretical, they're already happening. Across West Virginia, residents, environmental groups, companies, and government agencies are already arguing over what this future should look like. So let's take a look at the battles already underway. When people hear about these projects, it's easy to think this is all years away, that these debates haven't started yet. They already have. Across West Virginia, residents, environmental organizations, developers, and government agencies are already in court. The Ridgeline Project, its state air permit has been appealed. Organizations including Tucker United, the Sierra Club, and the West Virginia Highlands Conservancy argue the permit should not stand. Back in Warwood, residents have sued over the proposed Silicon Foundation project. Their concerns include noise, air emissions, flooding, and property values. They're also challenging whether parts of the state's new approval process comply with the West Virginia Constitution. Adams Fork Project, it has a federal lawsuit that alleges violations involving the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Water Act, and the National Environmental Policy Act. These aren't internet arguments. They're actual legal cases, actual public meetings, permit appeals, communities showing up before construction is complete. And here's something worth noticing. We've seen this before. Virginia, Georgia, Indiana, now West Virginia. Different companies, different governors, different politics. The same questions. What gets built? Who decides? And who lives with the consequences? Because once construction begins, it's much harder to ask those questions than it is before. West Virginia has a history, a long one. Coal, steel, natural gas, industries that brought jobs, fed families, and helped power our entire country. But they also left behind environmental challenges, economic transitions, poisoned water, and communities still working to rebuild. Our history matters because it shapes how people hear today's promises. West Virginia is also a state where many communities continue to face water infrastructure, where many families spend a larger share of their income on energy than households in much of the entire country. For people already balancing tight budgets, questions about water, electricity, or infrastructure aren't abstract. They are personal. That's why some residents aren't waiting. They are asking questions now. Before construction, before expansion, before today's proposals become tomorrow's reality. Not because everyone opposes these projects, but because people want to understand what we are agreeing to. That's a reasonable question, no matter where you live. Now remember, behavior leaves clues. Every episode, we've been putting another piece of this story together, not all at once, one layer at a time. The first episode, we asked, what is AI? And we talked about narrow AI, AGI, ASI, because before we understand where we're going, we have to understand what we're building. Then we talked about who's building it, which we covered Microsoft, Google, Amazon, OpenAI, Anthropic, NVIDIA. And these companies are competing to build the future. But remember, they're also kind of interconnected behind the scenes. Then we followed the money, investments, partnerships, government contracts, because technology doesn't grow without capital. And we also talked about how the money just keeps staying in the same circle, just changing seats with these companies. And then on this episode, we followed something else, the infrastructure, the laws, the communities. Because artificial intelligence doesn't exist in a cloud somewhere. It exists in buildings, power plants, fiber optic cables, transmission lines, water systems, county meetings, courtrooms, and neighborhoods. Now, look at the sequence: AI, companies, investment, infrastructure, communities. That's the progression. Ideas become companies, companies attract investment, investment builds infrastructure, infrastructure changes communities. That's not unique to AI. That's how industrial revolution happens. Now, watch what happened in West Virginia. The state changed the law, companies announced projects, communities organize, courts become involved. That's the sequence, not an opinion. That's an observable order of events, because behavior leaves clues. People tell us what they believe. Behavior shows us what they prioritize. Watch the behavior. Permits, contracts, power plants, investments, court filings. By themselves, they're just facts. See the clues. But when those same facts keep appearing in different places, under different governors, with different companies, you begin seeing something larger. Let's notice the patterns. Patterns don't tell us everything, but they often tell us where to keep looking. West Virginia is not just another place on the map. It's a place with a long memory. For more than 100 years, people have come here looking for something: coal, timber, steel, natural gas, chemical production. Today, it's artificial intelligence. And every single generation was told something similar. The industry will create jobs, the industry will build future. This industry will change everything. Sometimes it did, for a while. Coal helped build America. It also built West Virginia. At one point, well over 100,000 West Virginians worked in the coal industry. Families built new homes, communities grew, schools were filled, main streets were busy. Then technology changed. Mining became more automated. Companies needed fewer workers. The coal kept coming out of the ground. The jobs didn't. Today, only a fraction of those mining jobs remain. But many communities are still living with abandoned mine lands, polluted streams, black lung disease, and the economic scars left behind. The wealth left. Then came chemicals. The Kanawha Valley became one of the largest chemical manufacturing regions in the world. Good-paying jobs, growing communities, another promise. Then came the spills, the leaks, the fires, the contaminated drinking water. Plants closed, jobs disappeared, communities stayed. Then came steel, manufacturing, natural gas. Each wave brought hope. Each wave brought investment. Each wave also left behind communities trying to rebuild after the boom was over. That's important, because this episode isn't saying data centers are coal mines. They aren't. They are different industries, different technologies, different times. But history shapes trust. When people have watched industries come and take what they need and leave the communities carrying long-term costs, they naturally ask harder questions about the next industry that's arriving. That's not fear, that's experience. Different industries, different generations, the same questions. Who benefits? Who pays? Who stays? Who leaves? Some projects brought jobs. Some transformed communities for the better. Others left environmental damage, public health challenges, or economies struggling after the investment moved on. The lesson isn't every new industry is the same. The lesson is something simpler. West Virginians have learned to ask questions early, because our history has taught us it's much harder to ask those questions after construction is finished. That's why this story matters. Not because artificial intelligence is cold. It's because trust is built on history, and West Virginia has a lot of history. When you've lived through enough promises, you start paying attention to behavior instead of slogans. That's exactly what we've been doing together since the first episode. A few episodes ago, we started with a simple question. What is artificial intelligence? We talked about narrow AI, AGI, ASI, because before you can understand the future, you have to understand the technology. Then we met the companies building it: Microsoft, Google, Amazon, OpenAI, Anthropic, NVIDIA, the organizations that are racing to shape what's next. Then we followed the money, the investments, the partnerships, the government contracts, because money has a way of revealing priorities. And we watched the language begin to change from innovation to national security. This episode, we followed the next clue. We left Silicon Valley and came to West Virginia because artificial intelligence doesn't just exist on a screen. It has to exist somewhere. In buildings, in power plants, transmission lines, water systems, state laws, county meetings, and neighborhoods. That's where AI becomes real. This week, this episode wasn't just about West Virginia. West Virginia is where all the pieces we've learned come together. Technology, investment, government, energy, infrastructure, community, all connected. Maybe these projects will bring new jobs. Maybe they'll help diversify the state's economy. Maybe they'll become the model for other states. Those are possibilities, but history has also taught West Virginians another lesson. Ask the hard questions before the construction starts, not after. Because once $1 billion project is built, it's much harder to change than a proposal on paper. This isn't a story about being for technology or against it. It's about understanding it before it reshapes the place you call home. Because somebody lives next to every power plant. Somebody drinks from every river. Somebody pays every electric bill. Somebody votes in every county. And somebody lives with the decisions made today and for decades to come. So, the final question we'll leave you with from this episode is not about artificial intelligence. It's about all of us. If the rules in your community change tomorrow to make it easier for $1 billion projects to be built, would you know? Would you know who proposed the change? Would you know who supported it? Would you know who benefited from it? Would you know why it happened? Or would you not notice until the construction crews arrived? Because the biggest changes in our lives rarely show up and announce themselves. They happen. One investment, one policy, one permit, one decision at a time. Watch the behavior. What people say matters. What they do tells you more. See the clues. Permits, contracts, power plants, court filings, laws. Individually, they're just facts. Notice the patterns, because when the same behaviors keep appearing in different places under different names, they stop looking like coincidences. They become patterns worth understanding. The future isn't built in a single moment. It's built one decision, one investment, one law, and one community at a time.
Every generation of the same refrain. This time it'll all be different. Then the jobs moved on, but the mountains stayed. The bills kept coming long after they left. Now they're back with a different name, different logos, different claims. But if you listen, it all sounds familiar. Watch the behavior. Don't just hear the words. Promises are easy. Patterns never lie. Every road begins with one small decision. Every future starts with one change lost. See the clothes. Notice the patterns before they're written across your hometown. They say it's progress, they say it's growth. Billions coming for folks with hope. Maybe they're right, maybe they are, but somebody's asking who pays the cost. When the lights come on, the water runs low, the maps look different, the names all change, but history still leaves footprints. Watch the behavior. Don't just hear the words. Promises are easy. Patterns never lie. Every road begins with one small decision. Every future starts with one change lost. See the clothes. Notice the patterns before they're written across your hometown. Artificial intelligence, government contracts, power plants, county lines. It isn't one story, it's all one story. Connected, one permit, one investment, one decision. Watch the behavior. Say the clothes. Notice the patterns. Ask the questions. No one else is asking, because tomorrow doesn't arrive overnight. It arrives one signature, one meeting, one promise at a time. Somebody drinks from every river. Somebody pays every electric bill. Somebody calls this place home, maybe. That somebody